One of the difficulties in this technique is getting a consistent cut where it's not too deep and not too shallow on every pass. It's really easy to vary the depth of the cut. As you can see now, I just adjusted it. Now I have too light a cut. Still pretty light. Now we got deep. All right, so let me show you the other technique. This is too deep a cut for me. Let's back it off to one business card and see what we get. So the blade has not been readjusted the whole time. This rod just keeps it from cutting too deep at any one time. So I can go do several of these in a row from start to finish without having to readjust the blade and risk having a different depth on several of them. Also, as you can see here, the rod restricts getting in underneath there. The rod does not affect the depth of the finished cut, so I can back the rod back out of the way and get in underneath there and clean that out. And we'll get in there and make sure that wall is clean with another tool. Okay, so we've finished our grooves here, our dados. And we'll take a look at the sides, and if you look closely here, the saw cut was not quite deep enough, though the router plane cleaned it up to the edge. So we have some stuff in the corner, and the stuff in the corner is the most problematic stuff. And also, if you notice over here on this side, you see our layout line, our cut line, our saw cut is not on that line. So the saw cut drifted off the guide into the waist. So we have to clean all that up. The inside here is pretty clean. The other thing we do is sight down these lines and see if they're straight. If they've got a curve in it one way or the other, we want to straighten that out because that'll affect the fit. So in order to clean up this waist in here, there's several tools we can use. The first and simplest is a chisel. And you can get yourself a nice wide chisel, get in there on top of that waist and chisel it down. And you can come back with a router plane. Let's get the rod out of the way this time and get down in there and finish that off. So that's the first and simplest way. It has its drawbacks. You have to get it at the right angle. You have to get it where it just catches the waist. And if you don't have a straight line, you're not going to correct that straight line. And it's not very easily. So over the years, several tools were developed. This is the side rabbet plane, which I've talked about before. Now I've taken the bullnose off for another project. This has these bullnose pieces I was using as chisel plane so I could work right into the corner. But the problem, one of the problems with this plane is this very short reference on the bullnose. So when you're starting a cut, it's really easy to not get that flat, especially once you start pushing. And certainly you can't start a cut with the chisel. You have to be in the cut to get that started. So I'm going to put that bullnose back on there so that this could be used. And don't lose your pieces. Replacement parts are hard to come by. So there's where the bullnose piece sits. And it goes in there like that. See if we can get that screw started. So we can talk for a minute about the setup of this plane. These blades are difficult to adjust. Usually end up lightly snugging them up and tapping this with a hammer until it's into position. There's no what we call lateral adjustment here. And the most important thing to remember about the side rabbet plane is this point, which if you notice here, if you can see it, I've ground off, probably a little too much, cannot extend below the bottom because that will continually cut into the bottom of your rabbet or your dado, and it'll actually impede the blade cutting here. So this is not much adjustment. Basically, you grind or hone to the right angles, to the right lengths, adjust it once, and that's pretty much, you won't adjust it too much again, because for one thing, it's pretty difficult to adjust. So we'll put this back together. Let's adjust the fence to the right depth. Now, this can be used for the dovetail. As you notice here, this is pretty thin, and this can be tilted in here. This is not going to give you an exact reference. You're going to have to eyeball that, but you can come in. And the thing is, exacerbating the short of the bullnose, you don't want to be trimming out going here because you'll split out. So you really need at this end to be coming back from here on this very short end. So another plane, and I like this one a lot, and I use this the most, is a Japanese side rabbet plane. And this one, shall we call it a left-handed, because they come right and left, much like this one cuts going both ways. This one has a chip breaker in it, which you can see coming down there. And unlike most Japanese planes, the chip breaker is also the wedge. This is not true in the smoothing planes, but in some of the specialty planes, like the side rabbet plane, this is the case. But with the chip breaker, you can get a tear-out free side rabbet, side of a rabbet, which in some pieces can be important. And it comes right and left. This is the other style of Japanese side rabbet. This is the right-handed. In this case, it's right-handed. Couldn't be any simpler. It has some basic conceptual problems in that this is wedged in this saw cut in the body, which tends to warp the body over time, so it's kind of a maintenance issue. Bit tricky getting that in there and keeping it from shifting, but that's kind of a whole nother story. The Europeans and North Americans have a very similar side rabbet plane. In passing, it looks pretty similar. The blade is more captured with a spade-shaped blade that is captured up here with the blade exposed down here. But I've never seen one in real life. I've only seen them in pictures. So those are the alternatives. So if you look closely here, the saw drifted off the guide, and you can see the cut line marked there. And so we have to trim that back, bring it back to the cut line. Pretty clean down here. I'm going to finish cleaning out this side over here. We're in luck because this is going the right direction. Okay, so just about got it there. I'm going to undercut this a little bit. A little bit more. Now, what I've done, the other advantage of the wood side rabbet is this came at an angle, and I planed it back to match the angle of my dovetail plane. So I can set it in there flat and get pretty good reference for trimming that out. So I'm in the shadow here, so I'm going to reverse this. Looking pretty clean, needs a little work at the bottom. Yeah. If I have a very precisely set up side rabbet plane, we can get right down into that corner. But unfortunately, the point of that blade wears really quickly. Sometimes I have to come back and just cut it. Use a knife or a chisel. Okay, to make the batten, make sure you get it oriented right. To make it obvious, I'll mark it top. This is the working side. What we want to do is mark the width of the board. All right. So what we did, we did 1/8 of an inch taper. So we know that already. We can just do 1/8. You notice I'm marking this in pencil because this is more of a reference line to get us started. And just to keep things clear, our dovetail will be here, and it will be here, and it will run along there like that. Now, I'm going to double check that this setting, which I set earlier, it's helpful to check your adjustment from tool to tool as you move through this process. Let's get the post out of the way here. And it appears from my initial checking that the fence, which I had set up earlier with hopes of not having to set it up again, has shifted. So trying not to damage the blade on the router plane. Looks pretty good there. Don't try and do both at once. And don't beat your fence up when you tap it. A wooden mallet is better for this. Looks pretty good. Now let's check it here. Looks pretty good. So sometimes, in cross grain work, always draw the plane backwards so that the scribe would make a line, but this is parallel to the grain, so we really don't need to do it. And in fact, I've got it set so it barely touches the work. So that is a defining line. What we want to do is we want to establish this taper. So I need to take short, a little bit longer shavings until I get down parallel to that line. And when I'm just short of that line, I will stop and test it. Now, if you're doing this in a front vise like this, make sure that your fence clears the vise. I think it's one of the reasons why this plane has such a short fence. And the other thing about it is keeping that plane vertical and up against that shoulder line. So I can check already. No, we're not close. So I can continue to work down here. Now we're getting a little bit close to parallel in that small section. And now we can extend our line. Pretty parallel, I don't need to be cutting that much up there. Pretty close. One or two more strokes. I'm going to check it. Let's check it now.